I have not created 5, I have not created 10, but I have created 20 new decks that are ready for the Emerald Dream. So let's start talking about it. We got a lot to get through. If you decide to use any of these decks, you need to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because that's just the only way that you can say thank you, Clark HELLSCREAM. Thank you for doing your homework and doing my homework as well, and telling me how exactly can I have fun and win with the new cards that are available in the Emerald Dream. Now, I did not try to make an archetype with every single new set of cards that has come out, but I have tried to, make a deck with the cards that not only am I interested in, but I have tried to meta break some ideas that I believe are going to definitely be good on day one. So let's just go ahead and start talking about what I believe is going to be very good on the very first day of the ladder, and that is going to be Imbue Nature Druid. I do not want to see an Imbue minion in your deck whenever it comes to building this Druid deck, because the only thing that matters is your Hamul Rune Totem. Hamul is a 5 mana 5/6 legendary druid minion. At the start of the game, if each spell in your deck is a nature spell, imbue your hero power. Repeat this for every 2 spells you cast. So not only do you start with the imbued hero power right away, but for each time that you cast 2 spells, you automatically upgrade it. So I have 2 different lists that I am thinking about that can really milk this card for everything that it's worth, because there's also the card Grove Shaper, where every single time that you cast a nature spell, you summon a 2/2 treant and that has the Deathrattle of the spell that you just cast. So not only can you get, a bunch of more imbues by playing spells and by upgrading the hero power, you can get even more copies of those spells, which can improve your hero power with Grove Shaper, and that is why we are running cards like Tide Pools in order to generate even more resources, Mista, so we can replay a lot of these cards that we're definitely going to be replaying a lot of copies of, and we have Trail Mix for extra mana, Innervate for extra mana, Symbiosis for Discover. I'm not going to go through every single small thing about these decks, because that's what the future deck guides will be about, but I really do believe that some version of Imbue Druid will be really good, and I've even gone to try and make this other version of the deck that has a little bit more of a late game curve, that is trying to make Mista, Bob, Sadrasil work, some more late game strategies. It's pretty much the exact same deck, but it also has Daydreaming Pixie in here, which this card is kind of hilarious in my opinion, because it is very similar to the totem, the Needle Rock totem available for Shaman and for Warrior, to where at the end of your turn, instead of drawing a card, you are getting a random nature spell, and most of the time it's probably going to be useful. But I don't know how good this card is actually. Maybe this gets cut out of the deck for something more along these lines, but the point that I'm trying to make is that I believe Imbue Druid is going to be very powerful. It's just a matter of what exact 3 cards that we decide to use. This video is brought to you by Rogue Energy. Need a boost to help your gaming performance? Then Rogue Energy has exactly what you need to help you focus on your ladder grind. With 0 sugar, 15 calories, while being gluten-free, soy-free, and vegan-friendly, anyone on any diet can enjoy Rogue Energy. With so many flavors, you're going to have analysis paralysis while looking at the options. With flavors like Dragon Fruit Lemon, Blue Raspberry, Rocket Pop, and so many more. And for a limited time, you can save 30% on your next order with coupon code CLARK69. But Rogue Energy has given me a challenge this month. And if we end up selling more Rogue Energy on this channel compared to any of the other creators that are currently sponsored by them, they are going to send me a Rogue Energy mini fridge. And for context, I used to be their #1 creator through affiliate sales, so we can easily get this mini fridge, and it's going to be right in this corner if we end up winning it. So make sure to use the coupon code CLARK69 at checkout on your next order from Rogue Energy. Thank you so much to Rogue Energy for sponsoring this video, and now, back to the Hearthstone. Hearthstone video? Let's get back to the Hearthstone. Next up, I believe we have the deck that is going to be the most popular on day one, but I believe will naturally fizzle out. I think this deck is good, don't get me wrong, but the one thing that I'm not really confident in is Suck DK, Control DK being the best deck in the meta. I definitely believe that there is a lot going for this deck, because one synergize that I specifically want to point out is Poison Breath. Poison Breath gives poisonous to a undead minion on your side of the field, and you have Wild Pyromancer in this meta. So for 4 mana, you can play Wild Pyro into Poison Breath, and it will kill everything. It's pretty beautiful if you really think about it. So that clear is going to be entering this new rotation, while Soul Stealer, the 8 mana removal card, is going to be completely gone, not available in standard rotation. So you have to run a lot of board clears like Threads of Despair, Corpse Explosion, and even like, you know, of course, Bob is going to find his way into this deck. Bob is in a lot of these decks, by the way. He's just a really good card, and a lot of these decks have like, I'm going to build up a board, have it stick, and then play Bob, and now you have to deal with my board, otherwise I will kill you. Because I believe that's going to be a very common way of winning this, of winning games, is playing Bob when you're already ahead in order to set up that gambit turn. I'm going to kill you if you do not stop me. And Blood DK has a lot of these types of turns where it just denies, and Bob is one way of helping you get to like that late game with like Zilliax and when Ceaseless expands, so you can actually keep removing the board over and over again. Control decks are pretty easy to understand as long as you understand what you are controlling, and this deck might, you know, change a little bit depending on what exactly we're seeing in the meta, because Control needs to understand what is countering. Next up is going to be a DK deck that doesn't really play a lot of new cards, but it does have one of my favorite cards coming back, which is Malignant Horror. Malignant Horror is making its way back into the core set, and if you want to try and make Undead, Handbuff, copy DK work to some capability, now might be the best time, because minion stats and taunts are going to be very important, and if you play a bunch of Ambitier Puppeteers in order to buff up cards like Nerubian, Swarm Guard, Malignant Horror, Darkthorn, Quilter, even like Toy Snatching Geist, or even like a Shambling Zombie Tank, there's a lot of really good undeads to hit with Handbuff right now. So that's why I believe this archetype might see some play, because raw stats are going to matter a lot more now, because there's a lot less ways of dealing with these gigantic boards that you can generate for almost nothing. So Handbuff DK is not exactly the most flashy of archetypes, but it also did get more Morbid Swarm as well as Grotesque Runeblade in the early game in order to make sure that it just locks out everything to make it to that turn 5 powerhouse play. So if you like throwing some big stats and if you like big undead minions, Handbuff DK might be making a comeback this expansion. The next deck is Armored Demon Hunter, and we've already talked about this in a YouTube video, but I think that the one thing that's really interesting about this deck is that I had to run 10 new cards in the expansion while I was talking about it for my previous video, and well, putting 10 new cards into this deck isn't really that challenging, because you have cards like Ravenous Fellhunter and Ferocious Fellbat, which can summon 5-drop Deathrattles as well as 4-drop Deathrattles, as well as generating a copy of it onto the field. So Arcanite Defense Crystal, baby, all we are trying to do is make as many of these suckers as possible, and we actually are running the rest of the Starship package, not because we really care about putting these pieces into the giant starship, but because we want more ways of drawing from Warp Drive. So putting in a rush minion that can help us deal with some early game, as well as just, you know, a 2-3 River Croc could be pretty decent for a deck that needs like a 1-2-3 curve that doesn't just die immediately to every single aggro deck. So I think that this might be one interesting way of playing like a controlled Demon Hunter, because for a while now, Demon Hunter has pretty much been all in aggro or bust, and well, I'm just sick of busting. And if you like your Demon Hunter decks a little bit spicier, how about an Octosari OTK Demon Hunter? Oh boy, this is going to be a deck to where if you craft this right now, I can't exactly say this is the safest thing in the world, because this is going to be a deck that I am probably going to have to optimize, because it really only has one high roll in mind. It is play Octosari, somehow not died after drawing 8 cards, and then play Return Policy when you have your Aranna Thrillseeker on the field, so that way when you draw into your fatigue, you get to launch it back into the opponent. The way the Return Policy works is that it only works with Deathrattle minions that you have played, so you can't run Cliff Dive and run the Octosari that way, because it won't come back. You have to actually play the minion in order for Return Policy to work. And the other important thing to think about with Return Policy is that it is Deathrattle cards, which means you can't run every single Deathrattle weapon in the game, because if you decide to do that, then you can't make Spirit Peddler work. And I believe one of the best ways of making this deck a little bit more consistent is to run cards like Umpire's Grasp to get the Spirit Peddler, so that way we can play the Octosari and then activate the Return Policy in the same turn that we play the Aranna Thrillseeker. I really don't think there's any other way to make this kind of combo work, but this is going to be an archetype that I feel like a lot of people dip their hands into, so we'll see exactly what the perfect 30 of this archetype is, but just keep in mind, because of Return Policy's wording of Deathrattle card instead of Deathrattle minion, it is very important to think about, you know, what weapons you are going to put into this deck. Next up is going to be a deck that I'm a little bit scared of on how exactly it's going to be taking over the meta, because I really do believe that some version of Deathrattle Hunter is going to be very good, because Amphibian Spirit, I believe, is one of the best cards that is available right now in the new set, because Amphibian Spirit is a 2-mana Hunter spell. Give a minion +2/+2, and the Deathrattle give a friendly minion +2 and this Deathrattle. So you can copy this card with Terrascale Stalker very effectively, and this card is a battle cry that can be reduced by the Parrot Sanctuary. So we can go ahead and put these battle cry minions into the deck, like Zergling and Spawning Pools. So we have the Zerg package as well as the Giants, which actually should be in this deck. I'm gonna go ahead and say that these should be in the deck, because Giants just 100% makes sense in here. So I'm going to actually cut the... I don't think I like the weapon, in all honesty. You can either cut the weapon or you can cut the horse. Probably the horse is the best thing to cut, in all honesty, because it's not really the greatest of the Deathrattle minions. But when I was building this deck, it looked like a really decent card to throw in there because of Terrascale Stalker. And the idea of, if I can have a Deathrattle that summons minions, Amphibian Spirit actually goes to that minion that you summon, because the way that Deathrattles work is that a minion's natural Deathrattle is going to proc first, and then the next Deathrattle that you give to it will actually activate as well. So case in point, if you play Extraterrestrial Egg, and then you happen to put the Amphibian Spirit onto this card, and then you activate it with Terrascale Stalker, the egg will summon a 3/5 that will attack, and then the Deathrattle of the Amphibian Spirit can potentially go onto that minion that you just summoned. Very, very broken, very, very busted. That is how you're going to set up this Deathrattle chain very effectively, and I definitely think there is some version of this deck that is going to be tier 1, to where I have even put Worm the World Eater in this deck, just because I thought it would be really, really funny to proc the Deathrattles over and over again. Is this going to be the best way to build the deck? But Aggro Hunter has a lot of gas in the tank right now, and I am absolutely terrified on what this archetype could potentially do to the meta. But if you want your Hunter decks to be a little bit spicier, if you want to slow down the game and actually have fun by generating a bunch of random nonsense, how about a Malorn Imbue Hunter deck? Where the goal of this deck is, you know, sometimes Goldrin and King Plush, but I really do believe the best way to play this archetype is just to go all in on the Malorn, but I'm at least going to test the Goldrin and the King Plush, but these are probably going to be cards that you end up cutting. I know it sounds crazy. Goldrin, I think, is a card that is for sure going to get cut, while King Plush does have potential in this deck just because it's a really good win condition, and if you discount it and give it extra attack, you're returning every single minion and going face with it. So it makes sense why this would be in here. But the reason why I don't think Goldrin is going to be that good is because with a deck like this, I feel like it might be difficult to stick beasts onto the field for your Goldrin to actually make an impact, because unless you're playing Goldrin and Plush in the same turn, there's not really a lot of ways for this card to come down without some sort of massive setup that I don't believe is ultimately going to be as worth it as going for Malorn into Ranjari Scout, where you can discover 1-mana copies of the Wild Gods, so why not just get yourself a 1-mana Goldrin that might be good in that circumstance, instead of hard running this card that may not be that much of a payoff. So Imbue Hunter is going to be a very interesting deck building challenge, but I think that cards like Goldrin are going to be quickly dropped for something else. Next up, we have Imbue Mage, and I have two different ideas for this deck, where one is a little bit like of a late game mid-range combo, and again, we are running Seaside Giant because we have Forbidden Shrine. I actually made fun of this card originally until I thought about how we can play Tide Pool's locations very easily, which means we can actually run Giants in the deck and kind of give this deck a little bit more extra gas in the tank. We've also got cards like Rising Waves in order to delete, boards, so we can build up our own a little bit more effectively. We have cards like Khadgar for value off of the weapon. Kalagos feels really good just to put into the deck as like an extra, resource generator. Sometimes you need like a random blizzard out of nowhere. I think Saladrosil might be interesting to put into this deck, but the one thing that's making me not really want to put the card into my deck anymore is how they've changed the card. Now when you play Saladrosil, I believe it gives you random order, so you're not guaranteed to get the cards in the exact order every time. Makes it a little bit more inconsistent to run that card, so I'm just deciding to go in for nothing but tempo, nothing but board clears, as well as just generating as many minions and throwing them to the face as I can. So this is the control way of going about it. The other way of going about it is by making Raid Leader good. I know, just work with me for a second. So imagine if you build up the hero power, you stick some 1/1s. Why not just play double raid leader when you have 5 1/1s on the field to make that 5 damage into 15 damage, or 5 damage into 10 damage might just be good enough in a lot of circumstances. And then you also have Zilliax on top of this, so you have a lot of circumstances to where, you know, if your 1/1 stick around, they themselves are going to be a threat. So I like the idea of maximizing your hero power every single turn with this type of deck, because unfortunately, if you play a really slow version of this deck and you don't hit the imbues on curve, it is really hard to make a comeback with Imbue Mage in particular, to where my first impression of this deck is that I don't think it's going to be that powerful. But I would like to be wrong, because this reminds me of like a skeleton mage, and I kind of want an archetype like this to be good. So that's why I've made 2 different versions of the deck. Feel free to try out whichever one you think is better. If you want my personal opinion, I think this one might be better. But in all honesty, we might end up dropping the giant package in case it's not good enough, but I like the idea of making these locations really worth it with giants. Next up, we have Imbue Paladin, and if you guys want a very interesting way of making your Ursul work, I would highly recommend checking out my previous video talking about aura farming in Hearthstone, because you could run Eudora the Treasure Hunter in order to get some kind of weird duels treasures and put that with your Ursul value, because it's really funny in order to put Embers of Ragnaros on an aura so that way it casts 3 times during the game. But I really feel like that's not going to be necessary, because Ursul into Renewing Flames is already super powerful when you think about Anachronos also being available in this deck as well, because you could just remove any board with no problem, and then Renewing Flames is gonna deal 10 damage to the face almost guaranteed. So that's just extremely good in my opinion, to where you just build the deck around summoning minions, keeping yourselves alive, and just having constant threats on the board. So Imbue Paladin works very perfectly in this circumstance to just give you a bunch of dragons every single time. 7 mana dragons in particular are very, very powerful with a deck like this, because you have the 7 mana Death Knight dragon that has taunt, a 7/7 that gives you a bunch of 1/1s. The 1/1s don't matter, but the taunt on the 7/7 does. And then you also have Yosandre, which can obviously lead to some very nutty synergies if you keep getting that card over and over again. So Paladin, I feel like, has a very strong position potentially in this meta, but if it's very aggressive and doesn't allow for us to build this up, then Paladin might feel like a stinker in this expansion, and I'm really hoping that's not the case. I really like this Dragon Imbue deck. Hide your kids, hide your wives, hide everyone that has a weak heart, because this Hearthstone deck will absolutely make you cry. It's gonna make me cry. I cried while making this deck. I think that Control Priest has a very real chance of coming back and making me want to uninstall the game, because all this deck is going to do is utilize my opponent's cards better than they are. Because we have cards like Funhouse Mirror in the deck, we have Light Bomb Repackage. We're just going to completely remove everything we can while milking the Imbue hero power for everything that's possible. And the reason why I believe we're going to play their cards better than themselves is because we have every single random generation we possibly can get thanks to the Imbue hero power. I believe that cards like Aviana, for example, are going to be a great example of cards that you do not actually physically run in your deck, but you get them from the Imbue hero power when you need them, so that way if you want to go for greed or you want to outvalue somebody, then you start taking the game into that direction. So Priest is going to be a very value-oriented deck that is going to need its main deck to keep it alive, so that way its hero power can do all of this nonsense. And this right here is exactly why Raza needed to be nerfed, because if Imbue Priest was able to have a card like Raza, oh boy, could it do some very disgusting things. And there might be a future video talking about that topic in particular. But Control Imbue Priest, I believe, is looking like a very real scary archetype. And next up, we have a deck that is going to make Zeddy cry very beautiful tears, because this deck is just Bounce Rogue. It's called Combo Rogue for a very important reason, and there's one buff that we definitely need to take a look at, and that is the buff to SI7 Agent. This is a very important buff to keep in mind, because it is now dealing 3 damage off the combo, and you have a card called Lucky Comet, which discovers a combo minion, and the next one you play triggers its combos twice. So imagine this with like a Sonya combo, for example. If I play Sonya into a Lucky Comet SI7 Agent that I just happen to Shadow Step, so that way it's 1 mana, that is a 9 damage burst combo out of nowhere. That is absolutely broken. And now imagine doing this with Shadow Step and getting even more combos, getting even more value. and then having a red Infernal turn in order to lock out your opponent so that way they can't even interact with the combo whatsoever. I really do believe that there's going to be a rogue deck that is going to be the best deck in the game because this kind of synergy just it absolutely scares me, and it's just a matter of how consistent you can get this kind of combo out, to where I have made another version of this deck that actually has a little bit more pirates and more reasons to run cards like Dig for Treasure. You have Space Pirate to make the Waggle pick 3 mana, and you also have Dread Corsairs in order to, you know, get more bodies on the field when you play your Waggle pick. But you still have that SI combo, you still have Renfernal, you still have all the bounce effects that are in here. You also have Foxy Fraud that's in the deck in order to give us some tempo, some mana cheating into the other turns. And in the previous deck, we have, you know, Foxy Fraud into Defias Ringleader, so that way we can really make our Twisted Web Reaver really powerful as well. But just in case this card isn't as good as we might think, that's why I have built this version of the deck, because maybe that 1-drop is a little bit too much of a setup, not because it is expensive, but because you need a lot of cards in order to make that sort of combo work. It might be a little bit unnecessary. So Rogue is going to have to figure out whether all of these new cards are worth running, or if we're only going to run the cards that are very important for the bouncing effects, because that's really where the powerhouse of this deck is going to come from. Next up, we have Shaman, and I'm not gonna lie, I feel like Shaman was very hard to build in this particular expansion. The next deck is very, very nutty and very hilarious when you break it down, but unfortunately for Shaman, it feels like if Imbue token Shaman isn't that good, I don't really feel like there's gonna be a lot of powerful archetypes for the Shaman deck unless someone can cook up something massive. Because the only real way I can figure out how to make this deck even work is if we don't get our Imbue cards, then we could just play token Shaman and have like a wave of nostalgia high rolls to, you know, get a random wacky board out of nowhere. But this deck, even when it does hit, it hits the imbues on curve. When I was playing it during Theorycraft, it just felt mega slow. And maybe that's just because I'm a bad Shaman deck builder at the end of the day, but this archetype is all about, you know, building up the hero power, playing a minion, and then imbuing it. Every other deck has like something the imbue is going to do either to your hand or automatically something to the board. You need to set up this imbue, which makes the extra 2 mana off the hero power essentially attacks on any minion that you want to play onto the field and evolve. So because of that, I'm not really sure how good the Imbue Shaman is going to be, but if you go for like an aggressive Shaman that doesn't need to rely on the Imbue but can use it to enhance like a 1/1 into like a 3-drop or maybe even like a 5-drop, then maybe that's the way this archetype can see success. That's why cards like Firefly are in here, because if you could somehow get to the late game and imbue your hero power a bunch, you can have, you know, essentially 4 one mana minions that you can evolve into whatever, like a 5-drop, a 6-drop, a 7-drop if you've gotten that far. So I think that there's going to be a fancy, you know, deck building challenge with this particular deck, but I have to say, Imbue Shaman might be one of the weakest archetypes that's coming from this new expansion. But if you don't want to touch Token Shaman at all, and you just want to play with the big boys, I have created a big Shaman deck that I feel like actually might be pretty decent and might be one of the better ways of making this archetype try to work. Because Dungar can still be absolutely devastating if it hits the field with a Murmur combo, and you also have a Parrot Sanctuary, so that way on turn 6 you can play Murmur, Parrot Sanctuary into Dungar, and it feels very, very powerful. And you can even do that by turn 5 if you're really, really lucky. So you have that going for you. You also have a bunch of removal with cards like Lightning Storm and Baking Soda, Volcano to remove a bunch of board that I feel like is going to be very important in this particular meta. And you also have cards like the Mirithra that can bring back all the minions that you end up killing from your Murmur. So I feel like there's another Murmur combo that is possible where you just throw all of your battle cries into it, just let it die, and then you just play this minion and then bring back those minions automatically. So that seems like a very, very powerful combo in my eyes. But really, the most important thing is the Dungar. You also have the idea of Hagatha ripping your Nebulas from the deck, which you can also play for 1 mana thanks to Murmur. So there's just a lot that could potentially happen with this deck. If you saw my Dungar Shaman video a couple of months ago, it's pretty much that, but with new cards. So if you hated Dungar and not just Druid, you're gonna hate Dungar even more. Next up is Dragon Warrior, and I have two different ideas on how to make this deck work. One idea is just all in on tempo, and the other idea is trying to make it a little bit more late game oriented with cards like Tortola and Hydration Station. But the one thing I think is very interesting about this deck is how exactly we're going to build the perfect 30 for like an aggro mid-range Dragon Warrior, where we can run cards like Egg Basher, Mixologist in order to like, you know, have AoE whenever we need it. But the real power comes from our Gift Wrapped Whelp into Petal Peddler, which feels like the best 1-2 start that a dragon deck can possibly have. We have Quality Assurance to not just draw cards like Illusionary, Greenwing, and Curator from the deck, or even Yasandre, but when Illusionary, Greenwing has died, you can use the Quality Assurance to draw those cards from the deck, because the cast when drawn cards that you shuffle into the deck are actually minions that do have the taunt in them. So you can use that in order to cheat out a bunch of stats out of nowhere, as well as giving you know, some actual good tempo and some good draw in a deck that really needs to focus on spending mana every single turn. So you still have Succumb to Dark, Succumb to Madness in order to bring back Yasandre, but more commonly than not, you're probably going to use this card in order to bring back an Afflicted Devastator, just so that way you can stat bomb all over the place. You also have Clutches of Corruption in order to give you even more 6-drops, or more 6/6s, I'm sorry, as well as Yasandres. I feel like this deck has a lot going for it, but is primarily going to be focused on tempo and just sticking minions and making sure your Egg Basher has plenty of targets in order to jam face. So I think that Dragon Warrior has a lot going for it, but if you want a different version of the deck that is a little bit more late game oriented, you could put in Chemical Spill, you could put in Ham the Hungry, so you can put in New Heights and Tortola and Traveler, so you can run Hydration Station as well as Tortola, and just do what Warrior has been doing for quite some time. Play taunts, bring them back, and make everyone's life a living hell with Tortola. Now, there is a funny idea of putting in a Crazed Alchemist into this deck, but I'm going to wait to figure out if this archetype is even worth running in the first place before I start doing that meme, because I feel like it is going to be kind of difficult in order to pop off a combo like that. So if you want to run a Crazed Alchemist, go ahead and get rid of like whatever card you feel like. You can get rid of an Omelia potentially to put in for the Crazed Alchemist, maybe a Bulwark of Azzinoth if you don't have this card or don't want to spend the dust for it. But I really do feel like there's going to be some good version of Warrior that is aggro version as well as like a late game value Warrior, and I'm really looking forward to it. Warrior looks really fun right now to me. And the last class we're going to be talking about, finally, Warlock. Warlock has kind of two circumstances for it at the moment, where you go in for like Dark Gifts, and I actually feel like Dark Gifts are very well complemented by the Zerg package that is currently available within Warlock with the locations. Again, another deck that runs a lot of locations as well as Seaside Giant in order to scam the game out of nowhere. I think that Seaside Giant is going to have its stonks massively up in this next expansion, because there's going to be a lot of powerful locations that you really can't ignore within your class at the moment. And Warlock feels like one of those examples with Ultralisk Cavern as well as Spawning Pool. Now, whether or not we want to run the DK cards is a little bit up in the air, because it does work very well with the Ultralisk Cavern. But because of the Dark Gift cards running a lot of cards in that package, I didn't think it was wise to put the DK cards in there, because this deck already has a lot of pies that it is dipping its hands into. A lot of dirty hands in this pie right now. So the way that you can really make this deck sing is just by playing as many Dark Gifts as possible, getting your Wallow to some kind of charge Wind Fury OTK that just bombards your opponent out of nowhere. And you can even use a Gamagon, a Gam-Gam, we're calling him Gam-Gam. You can use Gam-Gam in order to play the Wallow for an extra 7 damage in case he is not good enough by himself. But I feel like this is just going to be one of those decks where you stick a decent amount of boards, you have 8/8s that go face, and Wallow just needs to essentially have charge in order to win the game. This might be the best way of playing Warlock, but there's one other archetype that we have to talk about, and that is Zoo Warlock. I think that a Demon Zoo Warlock could actually become good in this particular meta, because we have cards like Infernal Stratagem, which is a +3/+3 on a minion, and if that minion is a demon, you can reduce the cost of your next demon by 2. So Vulgar Homunculus, Employee of the Month. I don't think Fearless Flame Juggler is a demon, so let's double check that real quick. But there's a lot of demons that are available in this deck, and it's just absolutely massive asset what is available. So yeah, I think that there's a lot going for this deck, and the Fearless Flame Juggler is a demon after all, so after you deal a bunch of damage to yourself, you can just throw that for free. You also have Curse Souvenir, Solarium as your spells in order to draw through the deck very quickly. Fiendish Servant, very important card that is coming back in order to make the archetype feel even more devastating. Another demon that gives this minion's attack to a random friendly minion when it dies. So once it has one buff, thanks to like Abusive Sergeant or something like that, you can give it to like your Flame Imp or like another card on the field. Zoo Warlock might be making a comeback, and if that doesn't get you excited for Hearthstone, I really don't know what will. So yeah, what do you guys think? These decks, huh? These decks look pretty fun, in all honesty. I'm really looking forward to them. And don't forget, if you end up using one of these deck codes, you have to like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and potentially leave a nice comment letting me know what kind of decks you want to see deck guides in the future, or what decks you really enjoyed from this video, so that way I know what kind of archetypes I should continue to be making. But yeah, I had a lot of fun building decks today. I made 20 decks all in one sitting because I am really looking forward to this expansion. But in my opinion, board-based gaming is back, and that is something that Hearthstone has been missing for quite some time, and it really feels like we're going back to the good old days of Hearthstone, where we get to just play a minion and we don't just get blown out by our opponent's burst damage from hand. So thank you, Blizzard, for this very awesome expansion. Thank you for making it to the end of this video, and we will see you for the next one.